The following is the account of a British soldier, Rifleman Benjamin Harris of the 95th Rifles, extracted from his book Recollections of Rifleman Harris, Old 95th, available at the link in the description. What follows is war stripped of ceremony and glory, the sound of gunfire through choking smoke, the exhaustion of endless marches, the hunger, fear, and fleeting moments of courage shared between ordinary men. This is history told from the ground level, in the words of someone who shouldered a rifle, faced death repeatedly, and survived to remember it. With that, Rifleman Harris's memoir now begins, and his own voice carries the listener back to the roads, camps, and battlefields of the early 19th century.
I wish I could picture the splendid sight of the shipping in the Downs. At the time we embarked with about 20,000 men. Those were times which the soldiers of our own more peaceable days have little conception of. At Cork, where our ships cast anchor, we lay for something like 6 weeks, during which time the expedition was not disembarked, with the exception of our 4 companies of rifles, who were every day landed for the purpose of drill. On such occasions our merry bugles sounded over the country, and we were skirmished about in very lively fashion, always being embarked again at night. At the expiration of the time I have mentioned, our sails were given to the wind, and amidst the cheers of our comrades, we sailed majestically out of the cove of Cork for the hostile shore, where we arrived safely, and disembarked at Mondego Bay. The rifles were the first out of the vessels, for we were indeed always in the front in advance, and in rear in the retreat. Like the Kentish men of old, we claimed the post of honour in the field. Being immediately pushed forwards up the country in advance of the main body, many of us in this hot climate very soon began to find out the misery of the frightful load we were condemned to march and fight under, with a burning sun above our heads, and our feet sinking every step into the hot sand. The weight I myself toiled under was tremendous, and I often wonder at the strength I possessed at this period, which enabled me to endure it, for indeed I am convinced that many of our infantry sank and died under the weight of their knapsacks alone. For my own part, being a handicraft, I marched under a weight sufficient to impede the free motions of a donkey, for besides my well-filled kit there was the great coat rolled on its top, my blanket and camp kettle, my haversack stuffed full of leather for repairing the men's shoes, together with a hammer and other tools. The lapstone I took the liberty of flinging to the devil, ship biscuit and beef for 3 days. I also carried my canteen filled with water, my hatchet and rifle, and 80 rounds of ball cartridge in my pouch. This last, except the beef and biscuit, being the best thing I owned, and which I always gave the enemy the benefit of when opportunity offered. Altogether the quantity of things I had on my shoulders was enough, and more than enough for my wants, sufficient indeed, to sink a little fellow of 5 feet 7 inches into the earth. Nay, so awkwardly was the load our men bore in those days placed upon their backs, that the free motion of the body was impeded, the head held down from the pile at the back of the neck, and the soldier half beaten before he came to the scratch. We marched till it was nearly dark, and then halted for the night. I myself was immediately posted sentinel between 2 hedges, and in a short time General Fane came up, and himself cautioned me to be alert. "Remember, sentinel," he said, "that we are now near an active enemy, therefore be careful here and mind what you are about." Next day the peasantry sent into our camp a great quantity of the good things of their country, so that our men regaled themselves upon oranges, grapes, melons, and figs, and we had an abundance of delicacies which many of us had never before tasted. Amongst other presents, a live calf was presented to the rifles, so that altogether we feasted in our first entrance into Portugal like a company of aldermen. The next day we again advanced, and being in a state of the utmost anxiety to come up with the French, neither the heat of the burning sun, long miles, or heavy knapsacks were able to diminish our ardor. Indeed, I often look back with wonder at the light-hearted style, the jollity and reckless indifference with which men who were destined in so short a time to fall, hurried onwards to the field of strife, seemingly without a thought of anything but the sheer love of meeting the foe and the excitement of the battle. It was 5 or 6 days before the Battle of Rolica. The army was on the march, and we were pushing on pretty fast. The whole force had slept the night before in the open fields, indeed, as far as I know, for the rifles were always in the front at this time. They had been for many days without any covering but the sky. We were pelting along through the streets of a village, the name of which I do not think I ever knew, so I cannot name it. I was in the front, and had just cleared the village, when I recollect observing General Hill, afterwards Lord Hill, and another officer ride up to a house and give their horses to some of the soldiery to hold. Our bugles at that moment sounded the halt, and I stood leaning upon my rifle near the door of the mansion which General Hill had entered. There was a little garden before the house, and I stood by the gate. Whilst I remained there, the officer who had entered with General Hill came to the door and called to me. "Rifleman," said he, "come here." I entered the gate and approached him. "Go," he continued, handing me $1, "and try if you can get some wine, for we are devilish thirsty here." Taking the $1, I made my way back to the village. At a wine house where the men were crowding around the door and clamoring for drink, for the day was intensely hot, I succeeded after some little difficulty in getting a small pipkin full of wine, but the crowd was so great that I found as much trouble in paying for it as in getting it, so I returned back as fast as I was able, fearing that the general would be impatient and move off before I reached him. I remember Lord Hill was loosening his sword belt as I handed him the wine. "Drink first, Rifleman," said he, and I took a good pull at the pipkin and held it to him again. He looked at it as I did so, and told me I might drink it all up, for it appeared greasy, so I swallowed the remainder, and handed him back the $1 which I had received from the officer. "Keep the money," he said, "my man. Go back to the village once more, and try if you cannot get me another draught." Saying this, he handed me a second $1, and told me to be quick. I made my way back to the village, got another pipkin full, and returned as fast as I could. The general was pleased with my promptness, and drank with great satisfaction, handing the remainder to the officer who attended him, and I dare say, if he ever recollected the circumstance afterwards, that was as sweet a draught after the toil of the morning march, as he has drank at many a nobleman's board in old England since. I remember remarking Lord Hill for the second time in my life under circumstances which, from their not being of everyday occurrence, fixed it upon my mind. The 29th Regiment received so terrible a fire that I saw the right wing almost annihilated, and the colonel, I think his name was Lennox, lay sprawling amongst the rest. We had ourselves caught it pretty handsomely, for there was no cover for us, and we were rather too near. The living skirmishers were lying beside heaps of their own dead, but still we had held our own till the battalion regiments came up. Fire and retire one is a very good sound, but the rifles were not over fond of such notes. We never performed that maneuver, except when it was made pretty plain to us that it was quite necessary. The 29th, however, had got their fairing here at this time, and the shock of that fire seemed to stagger the whole line and make them recoil. At the moment, a little confusion appeared in the ranks, I thought. Lord Hill was near at hand and saw it, and I observed him come galloping up. He put himself at the head of the regiment, and restored them to order in a moment. Pouring a regular and sharp fire upon the enemy, he galled them in return, and remaining with the 29th till he brought them to the charge, quickly sent the foe to the right about. It seemed to me that few men could have conducted the business with more coolness and quietude of manner, under such a storm of balls as he was exposed to. Indeed, I have never forgotten him from that day. At the time I was remarking these matters, loading and firing as I lay, another circumstance divided my attention for a while, and made me forget even the gallant conduct of General Hill. A man near me uttered a scream of agony, and looking from the 29th, who were on my right, to the left, whence the screech had come, I saw one of our sergeants, named Fraser, sitting in a doubled-up position, and swaying backwards and forwards as though he had got a terrible pain in his bowels. He continued to make so much complaint, that I arose and went to him, for he was rather a crony of mine. "Oh, Harris," said he, as I took him in my arms, I shall die, the agony is so great that I cannot bear it." It was indeed dreadful to look upon him. The froth came from his mouth, and the perspiration poured from his face. Thank heaven, he was soon out of pain, and laying him down I returned to my place. Poor fellow, he suffered more for the short time that he was dying, than any man I think I ever saw in the same circumstances. I had the curiosity to return and look at him, after the battle. A musket ball I found had taken him sideways and gone through both groins. Within about half an hour after this, I left Sergeant Fraser, and indeed for the time had as completely forgotten him, as if he had died 100 years back. The sight of so much bloodshed around will not suffer the mind to dwell long on any particular casualty, even though it happened to one's dearest friend. There was no time either to think, for all was action with us rifles just at this moment, and the barrel of my piece was so hot from continual firing that I could hardly bear to touch it, and was obliged to grasp the stock beneath the iron as I continued to blaze away. James Ponton was another crony of mine, a gallant fellow. He had pushed himself in front of me and was checked by one of our officers for his rashness. "Keep back, you Ponton," the lieutenant said to him more than once. But Ponton was not to be restrained by anything but a bullet when in action. This time he got one, which, striking him in the thigh, I suppose hit an artery, for he died quickly. The Frenchman's balls were flying very wickedly at that moment, and I crept up to Ponton and took shelter by lying behind and making a rest for my rifle of his dead body. It strikes me that I revenged his death by the assistance of his carcase. At any rate, I tried my best to hit his enemies hard. There were two small buildings in our front, and the French, having managed to get into them, annoyed us much from that quarter. A small rise in the ground close before these houses also favored them, and our men were being handled very severely in consequence. They became angry, and wouldn't stand it any longer. One of the skirmishers, jumping up, rushed forward, crying, "Over, boys, over, over," when instantly the whole line responded to the cry, "Over, over, over." They ran along the grass like wildfire and dashed at the rise, fixing their sword bayonets as they ran. The French light bobs could not stand the sight, but turned about and fled, and getting possession of their ground, we were soon inside the buildings. After the battle was over, I stepped across to the other house I have mentioned, in order to see what was going on there, for the one I remained in was now pretty well filled with the wounded, both French and English, who had managed to get there for a little shelter. 2 or 3 surgeons also had arrived at this house, and were busily engaged in giving their assistance to the wounded, now also here lying as thickly as in the building which I had left. But what struck me most forcibly was that from the circumstance of some wine butts having been left in the apartment, and their having in the engagement been perforated by bullets, and otherwise broken, the red wine had escaped most plentifully, and ran down upon the earthen floor where the wounded were lying, so that many of them were soaked in the wine with which their blood was mingled. It was on the 15th of August when we first came up with the French, and their skirmishers immediately commenced operations by raining a shower of balls upon us as we advanced, which we returned without delay. The first man that was hit was Lieutenant Bunbury. He fell pierced through the head with a musket ball, and died almost immediately. I thought I never heard such a tremendous noise as the firing made on this occasion, and the men on both sides of me, I could occasionally observe, were falling fast. Being overmatched, we retired to a rising ground or hillock in our rear, and formed there all round its summit, standing 3 deep, the front rank kneeling. In this position we remained all night, expecting the whole host upon us every moment. At daybreak, however, we received instructions to fall back as quickly as possible upon the main body. Having done so, we now lay down for a few hours' rest, and then again advanced to feel for the enemy. On the 17th, being still in front, we again came up with the French, and I remember observing the pleasing effect afforded by the sun's rays glancing upon their arms as they formed in order of battle to receive us. Moving on in extended order, under whatever cover the nature of the ground afforded, together with some companies of the 60th, we began a sharp fire upon them, and thus commenced the Battle of Rolica. I do not pretend to give a description of this, or any other battle I have been present at. All I can do is to tell the things which happened immediately around me, and that, I think, is as much as a private soldier can be expected to do. Soon afterwards the firing commenced, and we had advanced pretty close upon the enemy. Taking advantage of whatever cover I could find, I threw myself down behind a small bank, where I lay so secure that, although the Frenchman's bullets fell pretty thickly around, I was enabled to knock several over without being dislodged. In fact, I fired away every round I had in my pouch whilst lying on this spot. At length, after a sharp contest, we forced them to give ground, and following them up, drove them from their position in the heights and hung upon their skirts till they made another stand, and then the game began again. The rifles indeed fought well this day, and we lost many men. They seemed in high spirits, and delighted at having driven the enemy before them. Joseph Cockin was by my side, loading and firing very industriously about this period of the day. Thirsting with heat and action, he lifted his canteen to his mouth. "Here's to you, old boy," he said, as he took a pull at its contents. As he did so, a bullet went through the canteen and, perforating his brain, killed him in a moment. Another man fell close to him almost immediately, struck by a ball in the thigh. Indeed, we caught it severely just here, and the old iron was also playing its part amongst our poor fellows very merrily. I saw a man named Simmons struck full in the face by a round shot, and he came to the ground a headless trunk. Meanwhile, many large balls bounded along the ground amongst us so deliberately that we could occasionally evade them without difficulty. I could relate many more of the casualties I witnessed on this day, but the above will suffice. When the roll was called after the battle, the females who missed their husbands came along the front of the line to inquire of the survivors whether they knew anything about them. Amongst other names I heard that of Cockin called in a female voice, without being replied to. The name struck me, and I observed the poor woman who had called it, as she stood sobbing before us and apparently afraid to make further inquiries about her husband. No man had answered to his name, or had any account to give of his fate. I myself had observed him fall, as related before, whilst drinking from his canteen, but as I looked at the poor sobbing creature before me, I felt unable to tell her of his death. At length Captain Leach observed her, and called out to the company, "Does any man here know what has happened to Cockin? If so, let him speak out at once." Upon this order I immediately related what I had seen, and told the manner of his death. After a while Mrs. Cockin appeared anxious to seek the spot where her husband fell, and in the hope of still finding him alive, asked me to accompany her over the field. She trusted, notwithstanding what I had told her, to find him yet alive. "Do you think you could find it?" said Captain Leach upon being referred to. I told him I was sure I could, as I had remarked many objects whilst looking for cover during the skirmishing. "Go then," said the captain, "and show the poor woman the spot, as she seems so desirous of finding the body." I accordingly took my way over the ground we had fought upon, she following and sobbing after me, and quickly reaching the spot where her husband's body lay, pointed it out to her. She now soon discovered all her hopes were in vain. She embraced a stiffened corpse, and after rising and contemplating his disfigured face for some minutes, with hands clasped and tears streaming down her cheeks, she took a prayer book from her pocket, and kneeling down repeated the service for the dead over the body. When she had finished she appeared a good deal comforted, and I took the opportunity of beckoning to a pioneer I saw near with some other men, and together we dug a hole, and quickly buried the body. Mrs. Cockin then returned with me to the company to which her husband had been attached, and laid herself down upon the heath near us. She lay amongst some other females, who were in the same distressing circumstances with herself, with the sky for her canopy, and a turf for her pillow, for we had no tents with us. Poor woman, I pitied her much, but there was no remedy. If she had been a duchess, she must have fared the same. She was a handsome woman, I remember, and the circumstance of my having seen her husband fall, and accompanied her to find his body, begot a sort of intimacy between us. The company to which Cockin had belonged, bereaved as she was now her home, and she marched and took equal fortune with us to Vimero. She hovered about us during that battle, and then went with us to Lisbon, where she succeeded in procuring a passage to England. Such was my first acquaintance with Mrs. Cockin. The circumstances of our intimacy were singular, and an attachment grew between us during the short time we remained together. What little attention I could pay her during the hardships of the march I did, and I also offered on the first opportunity to marry her. She had, however, received too great a shock on the occasion of her husband's death ever to think of another soldier, she said. She therefore thanked me for my good feeling towards her, but declined my offer, and left us soon afterwards for England.